ORSAM, Professor Alvaro Vasconcelos, who is going in New York to discuss a report on the UN peacekeeping from the Turkish angle. And here we are also about to start a joint ORSAM summit to discuss another report recently released by our report initiative and written by Alvaro Vasconcelos about a possible peacekeeping or peace mission to be neutral for Syria, depending on, of course, the political conditions, assuming that one day there will be some solution and eventually international and regional stakeholders will come to the point of deploying a peace operation on the ground. What would be the conditions of such a force? What would be the requirements to make it operational? And I also would like to thank him for this cooperation we had with him. Last year when he was working on the report, he did visit Turkey and they had a workshop in Oslo. They invited us as well. We had a meeting and then the report came out. And as I understand it, Alvaro, who wants to publicize the report, get the feedback from different audiences, but also he sees the project as a work in progress because since he set to study this important subject, the conditions on the ground have changed. The rise of ISIS and other developments, especially the coalition. So probably with the feedback from here today, we might be in a better position to revise the positions in the report. But we also did another improvisation along the way during the preparations of our event. Ambassador Raporu, they immediately last week they are visiting Turkey for another study. And then they were also kind enough to make time to attend the event. And then after Alvaro's presentation, we will have a chance to hear his reflections on the report as well as his take on the current situation. We also had Mr. Can Dizdar from Turkish MFA, who is handling Syria file. And he also was kind enough to make time to attend this workshop. He will also reflect on Alvaro's presentation. Without further ado, I would like to hand over the mic to Alvaro and have him present the report.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be back in Turkey, in Ankara. And I want to first of all, of course, to thank Şaban Kardaş and ORSAM for this opportunity, and of course the MFA for hosting us and being here so well presented. And after all of you came, and let me also highlight that I came from São Paulo, and I'm very pleased that the Brazilian ambassador is here with us. And I will say something about Brazil also, and I say in my report. So thank you very much, and I'm going to move to this presentation. I have done this report for the Armed Reform Initiative and NOREF, Norwegian think tank. And I had the collaboration of a number of people to do this report, including Şaban Kardaş, and I thank him also for that. The idea was to produce a report on a peace mission for Syria. Of course, this today looks like an utopia. Why to produce a report on a peace mission for Syria when the situation is one of war, civil war, sectarian war, and we don't see the peace process itself moving, and the peace deal does not seem to be in our reach. So, utopia. But I think it's a very useful utopia, as I went through the process. And it's a useful utopia for two reasons. The first is one day there will be any kind of peace. And after that, you need a peace for mission. And it's better to be prepared than to improvise when this time will come. In fact, I went to New York to write this report, and I had several meetings with people from PPKO, and I understood that they were working on a scenario for a peace mission for Syria, and during Geneva II talks, they were considering the possibility of the need for a peace force just after Geneva II, if success would have been the result of that meeting. So it is in the agenda, the idea of peace mission. But the second reason that I think is more important is that discussing a peace mission means also discussing the situation in Syria and what the international community should do to deal with that situation. And as there is different scenarios, discussing those scenarios, we can also engage with the countries that could be involved in the future on a peace mission. And by doing that, we could concentrate their attention on the Syrian file and what should be done if peace would come and if we need it, and if the condition for a peace mission would be there. And by engaging these countries, we will have a very interesting international conversation on Syria and the willingness of a number of countries to contribute to peace in Syria and what should be done. That's why I think it is of utility, such a report. Now, I have divided the report in three main parts. In the first, I have looked on the situation, the strategic situation in Syria. Where is Syria? And the second, I have looked on what could be the solutions for the Syrian war. And the third, what kind of mission we will lead and who will be the contributors to that mission. And at the end, I put forward some recommendations for the international community to start discussing this topic. Now, it's not necessary to go in detail in Ankara about the situation in Syria. It makes my life easier, because when I present this report elsewhere, I need to go in more detail about it. I want just to highlight that Syria has been an extraordinary failure of the international community. In the beginning of the Syrian crisis, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, declared, I hope that in some days I will not be in a situation as it was the former UN Secretary General, he was speaking of Kofi Annan, of saying we have not done enough. We have allowed a humanitarian catastrophe, a humanitarian crisis without precedent, without real international community intervention or engagement, strong engagement. And he was thinking of Rwanda. You know, when there is this humanitarian crisis, we always say this never again. And unfortunately, never again is again. It's not never again. And of course, we have in Syria, and this, for anyone who looks on this file and this situation, is really very depressing. We have now more than 220,000 people killed, more than 3 million refugees. The numbers are quite different from a place to another, but for the United Nations, 3,300,000 refugees, 6 million, more than 6 million displaced people, but 7 million displaced people. So more than half of the situation of Syria has been affected. And something like 1 million people wanted by war. So we have a country that is really in the humanitarian tragedy of a dimension that we have not seen so many times. And we are not doing what we should do this. Now, this situation in Syria, in my analysis, is part of a much larger situation in the Middle East. And I'm including Middle East Libya. I'm dividing the Southern Mediterranean in two areas. The Maghreb, in the western Mediterranean, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, where you have states and a more stable situation, and even democratic transition in Tunisia, and reforms in Morocco, and a more or less stable situation in Algeria. And you have a Middle East in turmoil. A Middle East where you have a number of failed states. So remember, for many years we spoke of failed states of sub-Saharan Africa, and we have concentrated our concerns on Congo, Mali, and so on as failed states. We never thought that we are going to face failed states in the Middle East, in the Southern Mediterranean, so close to Europe, and I'm speaking as an European. And our enemies were out to the south of Africa. Now we have failed states in Syria, we have a failed state in Iraq, We have Libya as a failed state. Libya of 1,000 militias, perhaps 200,000 militiamen, two governments. You know, and we don't know what will be the impact of these failed states in the neighbors, in Lebanon, in Jordan. We know this is terrible. We don't know what is the impact. So failed states in this area of the world, that is a vital area of the world, in a state of war. Each moment we speak, there are people being killed in different fronts of this very large Middle East regional war. And this, of course, is a very depressing and a lot of concern to the Europeans and to the others, especially for Turkey and to the international community about what is going on. One of the consequences of these failed states in the Middle East is that when you have a failed state, we have areas that, of course, are not under the control of anyone, and there you can float the most extremist groups can find a base. And we have seen how ISIS have created a base in Syria, a base in Iraq, and is creating a base in Libya. And the consequence of these bases is, of course, a contamination effect in relation to the neighbors, but also to Europe. We have seen events in Paris. My take on this is that the people who have committed these terrible crimes in Paris are Europeans. They don't come from the Middle East, but they were inspired by the ideologies and by the conditions of the Middle East to do these crimes. And this, of course, is what I call a contamination effect of events in this area towards Europe. Radicalization of young Europeans, not because just of the Middle East situation, but because of the conditions in Europe itself. You know, yesterday it was announced that France has now 3.5 million of unemployed people. As it is known, it is the greatest number of unemployed people in France from old French history, at least as figures are known. And of course, this has a social impact and contributes to marginalization of a lot of young people. This war, it's important, this Syrian war, to put it in perspective, because to put it in perspective helps us to see what can be the solutions. This starts as a democratic uprising following the Tunisian and Egyptian way. And we tend to forget that. At the beginning, there were peaceful demonstrations asking for democracy and freedom, like in Tunisia and in Egypt. The difference with Tunisia and Egypt is the repressive forces of the regime act against the demonstrators. In Tunisia, the repressive force went away. They didn't stop the demonstrations. They said to the leader, to Ben Ali, go home, go to somewhere else, and he went to Saudi Arabia. In Egypt, they said the same thing to Mubarak. But here they repressed the demonstrators, and with the time this was transformed in a sectarian regional war. And I think that is very important to discuss the future of Syria and what can be a peace mission for Syria, to understand that this is a regional war. Perhaps it's not necessary to say it in Ankara, but in many places in the world it's important to say that this is a regional war. It's a regional war, sectarian war, but a regional war, where different countries of the region are directly military involved and fighting inside the country. This is certainly the case of Iran, it's the case of Saudi Arabia supporting the Islamic Front, it's Turkey supporting the Free Syrian Army, and there are soldiers from Hezbollah involved in the war, Iraqi forces were involved in the war, so we have a regional war. A regional war in a very fragmented country, with a lot of strategic borders. We don't have just one border between two armies. We have a multitude of borders, what they call a fragmented strategic situation. And this, of course, creates a very complicated situation for a peace mission. And this is my first conclusion. If tomorrow you have a peace mission, you are not going to be in a situation like the one in Bosnia or Mozambique to speak of two cases that I know well, where an agreement between the parties to the conflict was an agreement that reached most, or if not all, the forces fighting that civil war. If you have an agreement between the part of the opposition and the regime, you still will have forces that will oppose any peace mission. So even if there was Geneva II, or small Geneva III, or 4, or 5, or 6, we don't know, after an agreement, an international force will face in Syria the opposition of armed groups, certainly of ISIS, but also other militias close to the regime that do not accept, other kind of militias, armed groups that are more criminal groups than political groups that will still be there. So you will have a situation of a fragmented security situation with strong opposition, military opposition to a peace mission. This is, I think, a very important conclusion. The second question that I deal with is, what are the way out scenarios? What are the scenarios for a peace deal? The first scenario, or for a peace solution, for the end to the conflict, the first will be an internal solution, an agreement between the parts, or that one of the parts will win that war. This does not seem likely at all. So I move from this one without weighing the terms. The second one is a global solution. A solution that will come from an agreement between the United States and Russia. And this was what was tried in Geneva I and Geneva II. And perhaps it is still in the mind of some international actors. This didn't work and does not seem likely to work soon. A third, and in my opinion more likely solution, is a regional solution with an international backing. What I mean by a regional solution? I mean that Saudi Arabia and Iran, that are more important in this conflict than it is United States and Russia, would agree among themselves that the situation is going too far. And there are some signs in this sense. The concerns of Saudi Arabia with the development of ISIS and the impact that this could have in Saudi Arabia, and also the number of young Saudis that are coming to fight in Syria, what is a concern for Saudi Arabia. And for Iran, perhaps Iran got what he wants. That is to maintain, at least in part of the country, the Assad regime in power. Perhaps not Assad, but the regime in power. And if Iran got what it wants, and if Saudi Arabia is concerned, perhaps we could see progress in the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I know that Turkey had this idea in mind, that Turkey has made some proposals in this sense to try to organize a kind of regional process that has the opposition of Saudi Arabia, but this was some time ago. I don't know if in the future this opposition still will be there, but I think Turkey there could play a major role as a provider of a framework for these regional discussions. And of course, these regional discussions need to have the strong support of the United States and Russia. There is a discussion, and I had here with the Minister of Foreign Affairs discussion yesterday, what is going to trigger what? Is a regional solution that is going to trigger a global solution, or it is the global solution that will trigger a regional solution? My take on that, from the discussions I had for this report, is that the regional dynamic is today more important than the global one, and that we need to progress in the regional dynamic to engage for the United States and Russia to engage. Now, of course, we know how difficult it is today, the relation between the United States and Russia, because of the Ukrainian dossier, but still they will play a major role. It's important now, from this way out scenario, I'm going to bring my scenarios for a peace mission. And I have put three scenarios for a peace mission. The first would be a humanitarian intervention. Robust humanitarian intervention, like the one in Bosnia or in Kosovo in the 90s. Facing such a humanitarian disaster, the UN Security Council would pass a resolution, say enough is enough, we need to intervene, and would allow for a humanitarian intervention. We know that the last resolution of the Security Council of July 2014, 2165, says that access to humanitarian aid is not at the hands of the Assad regime, but is a decision of the international community. And that this was approved by everyone, including Russia and China. So this is the base for humanitarian intervention. But nobody is prepared to take this legitimacy. You know? If you were in the 90s, such a resolution for Kosovo Bosnia would have been a strong support for humanitarian intervention. I don't think it's going to happen, this humanitarian intervention, but it needs to be discussed because it shows the limits of the international community, but also the needs in Syria. Now, anyway, this diplomatic effort, this success of this Security Council resolution in political terms is a good base for diplomatic discussions on the humanitarian situation in Syria and should be more used, in my opinion, should be more referenced. That has disappeared a little bit of the scope. It was approved, but after what? How to implement it? That should be the role of the Secretary General to ask why this is not being implemented. The second scenario for a mission was to support local ceasefires, or as the Mistura says, a freeze of fire, for instance, around Aleppo. This is what is today in the discussion, is that as there is a common threat for many of the forces in Syria, that is ISIS, it will be possible a kind of coalition between opposition forces and the regime. Coalition not necessarily in the sense that they will go to fight together, but they will freeze their fight because they have a common enemy. And that would be the case around Aleppo. But if this agreement will be reached, what does not seem to be on the reach, it's not likely to be reached. Still, you need to enforce it. You need to guarantee this agreement. You need to support it, and you will need perhaps a peace force to guarantee it. And it should be a robust peace force with a clear mandate. You know, I spoke with General Mood, who was the commander of the ONSMIS, the only force peace mission in Syria after the start of the war under this framework. And General Mood, what he says always, I have not a clear mandate, I have not any real capacity to implement what I was asked to do. And so we need to learn from it. And we had the mission to supervise the destruction of chemical weapons. Then there was a clear mandate, and there was the threat of military action if this was not implemented. And this is a big difference. You know, we can learn from success of the chemical weapons mission in relation to the unsuccess of NSMIs to understand why one was a success and the other not. Now, the mission that I think more likely to happen and more necessary is what I call a two-tier peace mission. A two-tier peace mission, in the UN they have discussed that they would need a stabilization force before a peacekeeping mission. That first you would have a peace enforcing mission. They even thought that would be NATO. They even made some contacts with NATO in order to know if NATO would be willing to play that role of stabilizing force, because they know there will be fight, and after we could have a peacekeeping mission. In my opinion, you cannot have two separate missions. You cannot have a war mission and after a peace mission. You need at the same time to do both, as it was done in Kosovo and in Bosnia. You need at the same time to be able to start the process, to stabilize, but also to start the political process, to help the reform of the security sector, to prepare elections. You need to do both at the same time. If not, we'll be in Afghanistan scenario, waiting for the day where the conditions will be there. Now, let's go to the last point, is contributors to such a mission. Who could be willing? I went around and I asked, willing to and able. It's not only willing and able. Starting by the willing, those who said to the United Nations that will be willing are very few. It was mainly Indonesia that was prepared to bring force for a peace mission. And I know that Turkey has said several times, we are prepared. If there is a peace mission, we are prepared to contribute. Now, on this discussion of the contributors, so as there are very few, I am more thinking about what would be those who will be able, more than willing, perhaps willing. So I start one scenario. It's the regional scenario. You have a regional solution for the conflict, and the parties to the conflict, to the regional solution, they say, we need to be present. And Iran will say, I'll contribute for this peace deal. Saudi Arabia will say, I'll contribute. Perhaps the Arab League will say, Saudi Arabia will contribute. And the Turks will say, well, I'll contribute. And is this a good idea? That's my discussion. What are the consequences? I think the consequence of such a peace mission enforced by the actors that are part of the conflict will be the fragmentation of Syria, because Saudi Arabia and the Arab League will give guarantees to a part of the country, Turkey perhaps to another one, Iran to the allies, and the Kurds will say, we don't need anyone, we'll take care of ourselves. And we'll have a fragment. In a certain sense, this can be a temptation for the international community, is to put peace as first, then the future of Syria. This was what they have done in Bosnia. It's what I call a Dayton agreement for Syria, a kind of the Dayton model for Syria, where you have an agreement and you freeze the situation as it is in Bosnia. When you go to Bosnia now, you know how were many aspects of Dayton, but we know also that this brought peace and the end to a humanitarian catastrophe. So there is a balance here between a Dayton type of solution that will mean a fragmentation of Syria, but perhaps the end of conflict, and a solution that will take in consideration the first demand of the Syrian people, that was to have a democratic state. That, of course, is very complicated to implement. Now, as I am not very much in favor of this solution, I put the accent on another one that is one that will be built around a number of European states. Because we need states that will be prepared to fight and with the capabilities to fight those who will be opposed to the peace mission. And who are those states in the world? The United States is not very likely to be involved in such a mission. It's not the American tradition. Russia could be involved in a role of giving guarantees to the allies, but it's not very likely to be the core of the mission. So if the core of the mission would be formed by France, Great Britain, I went to Britain to discuss this. They were not very enthusiastic about this idea to be engaged, but perhaps after Afghanistan, when troops come back from Afghanistan, there will be more willingness for the participation on such a mission. But we need a core of countries with military capabilities to make peace enforcement, not only peacekeeping. And after, we need to add a number of other states that will be prepared to contribute to the mission, more on a peacekeeping dimension, but perhaps also with a strong military component. And I think the BRICS team, I call them the BRICS team. The BRICS team is the BRICS with Turkey and Indonesia. Would be the right group of countries to play this role. I have discussed this in Brazil, and I'm very pleased that the Brazilian ambassador is here. And you must remember that Brazil is now in the UNIFIL, is in charge of the command of the naval force of UNIFIL. So Brazil has already a presence here. Brazil has an experience in IT quite important, and there is, I think there will be willingness. I'm not speaking for Brazil, but my analysis that will be willingness of Brazil, of India. Also I had contribution from my report from India, and they will say yes, India could be part of such a mission, and we will have the BRICS team perhaps involved. I don't know if China, I didn't discuss that, but India, Brazil, Turkey, Indonesia, etc. Now, the others. Of course, we need a very important Arab contribution. Is this going to be the Arab League? Can the states, the neighbor states of Syria be involved? I am concerned with some of them. Let's think of Egypt. Egypt will be perceived by the Muslim Brotherhood and vice versa as a kind of being in the clash inside Syria. So Egypt will be a complication, perhaps. But other countries, for instance, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, certainly Morocco and Tunisia will be willing, perhaps Algeria, Jordan, who are countries, in particular Tunisia, Morocco and Jordan, who have a tradition of collaborating with the Europeans on peace missions. They were in Bosnia and Kosovo, would be a possibility. And what kind of structure for such a mission? And my suggestion that we should discuss a structure style Berlin Plus, where the European Union will use the assets of NATO and structures of NATO, will not be a NATO mission, but will be a European Union, with a group of willing and able European states, but using the assets of NATO. That's what Berlin Plus. That was the case of the EUFOR in Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Altea mission, and it was quite successful on practical military terms. Now, to conclude my recommendations. Recommendations are not recommendations for the mission, are recommendations on the way to go there. This discussion, this debate. And I have three recommendations for it. One is that the European Union High Representative will present to the European Council a proposal of what future role of Europe in Syria. This was done in the past in other contexts of missions done by, in particular by Solana, bringing, in case of Kosovo and Bosnia, this to the Council before it was implemented the mission that would allow the Europeans to start thinking about that. The other one would be for the United Nations Secretary General or for the Special Representative of the United Nations for Syria to nominate someone to start this conversation with countries about what could be a mission and what could be their contribution. And finally, as perhaps these two first that I am proposing will not be implemented as soon as it should, we could start a debate on think tanks, on civil society, networks, about what should be done. But I stop there. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for this broad and comprehensive overview. Mr. Dizar has another word at hand. First, we'd love to have his own questions on the presentation.
Thanks very much. I wish to congratulate Alvaro for this great work. But I have a confession to make. Like any busy bureaucrat, I skimmed the report and read thoroughly the conclusions and recommendations. So I will base my evaluation on this. Of course, I mean it touches all the right spots, and from the explanation we heard, you know, it focuses. Issues from the right angle. With regard to this peace mission, I mean, it's obvious that it will require a specific UN resolution. In the absence of it, I think everything will be remain in the air. And for the time being, I don't see a UN Security Council resolution coming on this issue. So we all know this, I'm sure Alvaro also knows this, but I understand that what Alvaro tries to underline is that, look, it's time to act. This cannot go on like this. We cannot let Syria simmer in its own juice. And if we don't take action now, things will be much worse tomorrow and much more riskier tomorrow. So we need to do something. Time is not on our side. If I read it correctly. Of course, when there is a will, there are several ways of doing this. I mean, a mission. Doing it under a UN umbrella, for me, from my own experience, doesn't seem the most practical way. Because if you start the fourth generation under UN DBKO, you cannot achieve what you are intended to achieve, because you need a robust force, as you put it, capable force, because the situation we are facing in Syria is very demanding, very challenging, and you cannot address this situation with a type of peace mission like we have in UNIFIL, I mean in Lebanon, like UNIFIL, or in the Balkans and so on. It will be unprecedented in many ways. So maybe UN can subcontract this to some other eligible candidates, or there is, I mean, if you ask me, we don't need, under the circumstances, a specific UN resolution anyway, because what we have currently, like 2170 or 2178, addresses the issue enough, and also you have 2118 and 2139 and the following resolutions. If you compare this acquis we have on Syria, the Security Council and the General Assembly, it's much stronger than we had for Iraq, for example, for the 90s, when we started Operation Provide Comfort. I mean, we had only one Security Council resolution at that time, and it was asking only not to impede humanitarian aid flow, asking Saddam to not to impede humanitarian assistance flow into Iraq. So I think what we have now is much more comprehensive, much more forceful, and if there is a political will, I think there is enough legal infrastructure to act on it. Again, I mean, the issue with political will, if we can gather enough political will around one table, the fourth generation wouldn't be a problem. Finding a right address wouldn't be a problem. But what the problem would be is to leave this issue to continue to take its own course, which is going towards a trailer. I mean, a disaster. I don't need to, elaborate on the dynamics of the situation we have now in Syria, but we all know that if we don't take a decisive action or tough decisions now, the consequences will be much greater tomorrow, and we will be all judged by history and by next generations. Yes, unfortunately, I have to.
Any urgent questions to proceed without talking about this position?
Just quickly, if I may, Jan, I know you have to go. You talk about the need for political will.
Yes.
Do you have an idea of which countries would have this political will? Who would you see around the table? Who would you bring together?
Well, UK must be one of them.
Well, you and us, but who else could be there with us?
I mean, the countries, there are usual suspects on this, of course, because they have proven capabilities, experience. We are not willing to, leave this thorny issue to some other hands. We will be part of it definitely if there is such decision, and we have to have the US on board because first the political weight, and second the military might will be required. And to complete the P3 picture, France would be interested, I hope. I think currently France is much more interested than the UK. That's something for a fact. And of course, there should be some participation from other regional countries too. There is already one in place in the fight against Daesh. There's an interesting alliance conducting aerial operations. So we can imitate the format with some changes, of course, and work on it. I mean, that's it's a textbook coalition of the valley. Okay, thank you.
You can
Thank you, Şaban. I'm Robert Ford, formerly the American ambassador in Syria, and working on Syria at the State Department. I retired 1 year ago, and I'm now at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. Also from the Middle East Institute. With me today is Ms. Rama Salim. We're in Middle East this week talking about the crises in both Syria and Iraq. We'll go back to Washington next week, and the joy of being outside of government is that you can speak publicly and you can speak freely. So just a couple of reactions to what you said, Alvaro. And at first, I think what you said had great wisdom, but the perspective. I worked quite a bit with Hillary Clinton and then John Kerry on the Geneva process. And the situation now in 2015 is so much more difficult than it was in 2012 or even 2014, especially the presence of the Islamic State, Daesh, and the relatively greater strength of the Nusra Front, Daesh al-Qaeda. These were not really issues in 2012. The situation is much more complex, and any peacekeeping force that goes into Syria will, exactly as you say, be going into a hostile war situation. So with that, a couple of perspectives, I think, of how the United States government would look at this. But again, I emphasize I'm at the Middle East Institute. I'm not part of the United States government now. I think Washington's initial reaction would be, especially with this administration, which focuses very heavily on international law wherever possible, to try to work through the United Nations. But what that means is that they will need to have Russian support. And the Russians will be difficult on an issue like this if the Syrian government is not favorable. The Russians, my experience has been, strongly believe in upholding the sovereignty of borders. And so if the Syrian government rejects the introduction of a peacekeeping force into Syria, I would be very surprised if the Russians overrule the Syrian government. The Russians, I have to be fair, did finally accept the United Nations Security Council resolution saying there should be cross-border humanitarian assistance, but it took a very long time to get there, and even then they said it should be in coordination with the government in Damascus. So my guess is they would use similar language for any peacekeeping operation in a Security Council resolution. In terms of getting Syrian government support, I think the position of the Iranians on this would be vital. I think Iran's influence in Damascus now is much greater than that of Russia. And so the Iranians perhaps would be able to use their influence to get the Syrian government to accept such a peacekeeping operation. But in the end, it will be a Syrian decision, not an Iranian decision. So, and exactly as you had said, I cannot imagine that Daesh, the Islamic State, will ever accept a peacekeeping operation in Syria. I'm sure they would target it. Probably the Nusra Front would as well. And there could well be other militias, as you said, that would also resist it. I am reminded of the difficult experience of the United Nations in Homs just about 12 months ago, where pro-regime militias fired on the United Nations convoy that went into Homs with relief supplies. And in fact, it required a senior official from Damascus to go to Homs to get the pro-regime militia to stop shooting at the United Nations convoy. So, second comment, then, in this kind of situation, the American vote on a resolution about this, their biggest question will be, can a United Nations-backed peacekeeping operation going into a hostile environment, can it be effective or not? I would not assume the Americans automatically would approve it. And here's why. They will be thinking not only about the situation in Syria, they will also be thinking about the bigger issue of the United Nations credibility. And they will worry if this peacekeeping force goes into Syria and it is not effective. That it takes casualties, but the violence does not subsume it, it is a mess. Not so different from the former Yugoslavia situation before the American air campaign began in Yugoslavia. I think then the Americans will be reluctant. They will be more interested in preserving the credibility of the United Nations than in rushing a peacekeeping operation without a clearly defined mission and chance of success before deploying that. And so the mission, the exact mission of the force, Washington will want to be very precise. And because it will be going into a hostile environment, then the question of its armament, certainly not an unarmed force, as Kofi Annan had in 2012, which was ineffective. But then also its ability to respond to attacks against it, its ability to detain people. There will be a lot of questions the Americans will want to make sure that this force is strong. The stronger this force becomes, the harder it will be to get the Syrian government to accept it and the Russians will. And so there'll be a balance. And that'll be a negotiation. Do you see what I'm saying about this? Yeah. Yeah. Third, just a short comment about contributing countries. First, like you, we in the State Department did a survey of countries. We did it in, I have to get my dates right, 2013. We did it privately through diplomatic channels. We found almost no countries willing to participate. So I take heart that you think we could get a few, like Indonesia, maybe Brazil, maybe India. You had more success than we, the Americans, did. So, and the answer we got from many, many countries was, we might contribute, but only if you Americans also contribute combat forces. And of course, the Americans contributing combat forces, especially under the United Nations mandate, that'll be very difficult, especially with the Republican Congress. So I'm just, it's great to be out of government, you can speak so freely. So the Republicans will be very against that. So I think, Ron, what do you think? You would.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
But also the whole idea of ground mega forces.
Oh yeah, ground forces in Syria in a hostile environment.
In the Middle East.
Yeah.
Period. I mean, the American public has
Yeah.
checked out
Yeah.
that file totally. And I don't think anything should be about it.
So you might be able to get logistic support from the Americans or intelligence support maybe even air support, but ground forces, very difficult, especially with this administration. So then I have two other comments on the community. Number, sorry?
The Berlin Plus object.
I think the logistics and all that probably the Americans might be willing to do, but again with these other questions about can the force be effective and what's its exact mission and things. So outside of the United Nations, such as you mentioned, that might in some ways be easier for the Americans, but again, the big question will be how would you justify that under international law if the Syrian government refuses it? And that will be hard. If the Syrian government welcomed it, it would be easier for Washington because of the international legality questions. Again, I love being out of government. George W. Bush didn't care about this. I mean, they would just find lawyers to make the arguments. This administration, the Obama administration, the president is a lawyer. Top people around him are very attached to international law. So the international legality standpoint will be much more important to this administration than it was to the previous administration. So, two other quick comments I can agree on what I talk about that. Number one, Arab League. I think Syrian Alawi communities will be very afraid of having soldiers from Sunni-dominated militaries being stationed in the community. Doesn't matter if they're from Egypt or from the Gulf or from the Maghreb, North Africa, they will be nervous about Sunni Arab soldiers in their community. So who you put in there, I don't know. No offense, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you. Because you are free to say what you think.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the other side, I think the opposition is going to be very reluctant to see countries like South Africa, China, Russia have people on the ground inside Syria because of their support for the regime. They will look at them as not neutral. So Indonesia is a more interesting question, or Malaysia, or something like that. But even then, Sunnis in an Alawi area, not so good. It'd be better to have soldiers from Europe or something. And then your last comment about needing to start a debate about a solution with Syrian civil society, I totally agree with that. And there are these discussions that have started today in Moscow. I have very little hope about them. I don't think what the Russians are trying to do is bad as a matter of principle. I just think the way they have arranged it, it probably will not get very far. Because armed groups are a problem on both sides, not politicians. And so it's great to have civil society begin dialogue, but it eventually will have to expand out to armed groups. And that's more difficult. One of the advantages that Demo Stewart has with his efforts is he is talking to armed groups. And so that's useful, I think. Civil society, yes, but it has its limits. How to bring in armed groups over the medium term is a bigger question. And that's not easy. I mean, that is very difficult.
May I think, just building on what Robert just said, I think this kind of format, if you can do it completely wrong, there is definitely the first enough ideas as part of the agreement, how we can protect the minorities. This is the big issue with the minorities. Not only about Alawite, but also Shias. You have whole villages which are well with Shia. So eventually, as Robert said, Iran has to be part of this regional agreement that can fuel an international agreement in Syria. And so a conversation like this in collaboration with a think tank in Tehran to start getting the ideas out within that process, I think it's important because they are struggling with this idea that every time you speak with an Iranian official, the whole issue is that, okay, we understand that future decisions have to be based on majority rule, or however Syria is going to be governed has to be based on majority rule, but with strong guarantees from the international communities for minority rights and minority protection. And so that argument of peacekeeping, how it's going to be part of the regional deal and the international group, important to spread the idea at least, and the pros and the cons and the mechanics and logistics into the Iranian system.
I don't know what to say after what Robert has said. I totally agree with his conclusions. He knows very well the situation and that he was participating in the Friends of Syria. While those Friends of Syria did not take the necessary steps at the beginning, where we find now the situation is very complicated. No need to assert that. It's not only a regional proxy war, it's a global. It's tied to players like Russia. Don't forget about what's going on in Ukraine. Don't forget about this oil crisis now and the accusations of the Saudi Arabia going forward with production to squeeze Russia and Iran. The Arab League at the beginning of this uprising in Syria, the Secretary General has contacted the authorities. He has visited Syria. The Hafiz had an agreement to solve this problem. We have sent observers to follow up the situation, but it was not, they were not up to their engagements. And the problem with Syria and all this Arab Spring that the regime and the state is one. The family, the Hafiz al-Assad and the Assad family, they have made this regime. So it's if you are against the regime, you are against the state. And a lot of the part of the society is engaged in this army, and it's different from what happened in Egypt, different from what happened in the reading of the international community to this problem was wrong. The reading of the regional players was wrong. Now there is a disorder internationally. The Russians, they don't only want, they are using this card of Syria, but they have other things they are asking for. They are very angry from NATO expanding east. They are very angry of what's this policy of the oil crisis. So it's very difficult to convince these players. If these players do not come to an agreement, but this agreement is really very difficult to reach at the actual conjuncture. I don't know what you think, what could the Arab League do on this? The multilateral diplomacy has failed. The UN Security Council is divided. And we have seen that in Libya, it was a different story. The Arab League has gone to the Security Council saying that we have to impose a no-fly zone to protect the civilians. And the Russians and the Chinese, everybody has agreed on that, and there was a resolution. But then everybody, we are seeing what's going on in Libya now, and nobody wants to have boots on the ground. The Americans definitely don't want that. The Europeans are not that warm for this solution. So having a peace mission, I don't know how can we come to that without convincing these players. And these players, I don't think the Ukraine, Syria, it's a global now. It started domestic, it became regional, and then it's more complicated. Now you have failed states, as you said, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Libya. So all this, how can you address such a problem? I'm really not that optimistic. Sorry for that, but if you, I will let you go to the Arab League, go to the Arab League, try to compensate. Maybe Ahmadi and the people there, but I don't know. I know that after what we have done at the beginning, and then the international community failing to take the necessary steps at the beginning, we are in this situation now. This situation needs more than talking about Syria. Now we have to talk about other things, because the Russians want something. The Saudis are very unhappy with these negotiations with Iran, and so it's a lot of things coming together and very difficult.
Would you like to respond now?
Yes, but I cannot go through just two comments on these very interesting comments, and thank you very much for your comments and the other comments. One is, when I'm thinking of a peace mission, I'm not thinking just of a peacekeeping mission. I think it should be peace enforcing and peacekeeping at the same time. That we are in a scenario that will be similar to Bosnia, when we decide to, after their campaign. So you need to have a force that will be able to fight. And at the same time, it will be able to build peace. And so this needs to have these two, like U4 or also. And for that, that's why my idea it would be kind of a Berlin Plus. You need to have real, strong military capabilities. And the UN will not go there without a stabilization force first. That's the UN perspective. You need to stabilize first to have a peacekeeping. Let's say perhaps what we need is a two-tier mission, as we had in the past in the Balkans, that will do both. And we need to, and for that we need American strong engagement on this solution. And that's no doubt, this will not happen. The Europeans will not move without a strong American incentive and strong American support that will give this a aid to, that's why I call Berlin Plus, and then to framework without being NATO. And you need to have other countries engaged that will contribute to give this that this is not a Western intervention. Again, another Western intervention that is really UN international intervention. And in this sense, that's why to speak with Brazilians, to speak with the Indians, to speak with Indonesians is so important. And you need the Russians. You have the Russians in Bosnia to say to the Serbs, your interest will be guaranteed. So you cannot say this is anti-Russian. The Russians should have a role. And they have a role also in Kosovo because of the Serbs of Kosovo. So here they will have a role to assure the Alawans that their interests will be more or less protected. This is the option I am favoring, because the other one is to have the Iranians, the Saudi Arabia, and this will be to consolidate this partition of Syria, and that I am not as convinced as I should that we should have. Now, to the Arab League, if I would make a recommendation to the Arab League, I would need first to discuss with the Arab League to know, but speaking loudly, thinking loudly about this, I think that it's more on the peace process that the Arab League plays a very important role, could play a very important role than the Indonesian. And in this peace process, as the central question, in my opinion, is the regional arrangement. If the Arab League will be able to convince Saudi Arabia how this is possible, that perhaps all the other countries coming to an agreement, this will have an influence in Saudi Arabia, that a kind of agreement with Iran will be important for the future of the stability in the region, and that they share today common concerns because of ISIS, because of radicalization, because of foreign fighters, what you want. That I think is more on the political umbrella, bringing utopia. The Arab League speaking with Iran, that's not possible, I understand. Is it this kind of dilemma? To end with this idea that this is a fundamental part of the fight between the Arabs and Shiites, or the Arabs, Muslim Arabs, Sunni Arabs and Shiites, and this is part of the fight with Iran. There will be no solution without a certain role of Iran in the solution. That's, I think, we know that. But we need also Saudi Arabia, we need also the Arab League, so it's political. It's on the political dimension. After on security, Robert, you said that to have Arabs would be very complicated. But I'm not so sure that some Tunisian soldiers and some Moroccan soldiers will be such a complication. Those who have been involved in peacekeeping missions involving the Moroccans and Tunisians, more on peacekeeping than on peace enforcing, than on fighting capabilities, they found them people very willing and able to contribute. And it would be very strange to have a peace mission in Syria with no Arab component. But I don't know, is all the difficulty is there. All right.
And Ambassador, you should feel very critical. I think it is sensitive for Syrian Alawi communities in places like Raporu and Banyas and Tartu to have soldiers, Sunni soldiers from Arab countries. I think they will be very nervous.
But they should not do that.
Well, but they will be because there are, for example, many Tunisians in Daesh, and there have been for a long time. There have been many Moroccans in Daesh as well, and so the Alawi streets are going to be nervous about that. Now, if there are Moroccan or Tunisian soldiers in areas held by the opposition, I think that's much less sensitive. Much less sensitive. But in the Alawi neighborhoods, I think there you will have a sensitive.
Then you can have
I don't know what you think.
I totally agree, and there are more than that. Women and men and this
French, British,
this sectarian problem is really taking dimensions that we really have to be aware of. But I agree with you that there should have been a dialogue between the Arab League and Iran long time ago. The Arab League does not participate in P5 and we are the most concerned region for nuclear Iran, more than the United States, more than any part in the world. Because any consequences of any accident, it would be the weight on the United States that would take the whole thing. So I tell you what happened for this. Amr Musa, the ex-Secretary General of the Arab League, has suggested this in the summit of Syria that took place in Libya. And it was Hosni Mubarak at that time. And Hosni said, but this is against our interest. Amr Musa answered back and said, no, it's for our interest. If we do not agree with Iran on a lot of issues, we have to sit down to the table and discuss these issues to solve this problem. But and there was even a discussion in the Council of Foreign Ministers and in the Arab League headquarters about this, and there was a resolution, but this was postponed. If you can sell this to the Arab League now, I think it would be a good thing. But without really having this dialogue or having this, it would be very difficult to solve the problem. But now, we have militias, Shia militias in Lebanon, have them in Syria, you have them in Yemen, and you have this problem of Bahrain. So these are alive problems that I don't think the parties that are concerned by this would be ready to open up. You should first address the Iranians. If they can make some compromise, I think the others will do so. But you have seen also how the Saudi Arabia, they had a seat in the Security Council and then they were very angry from this negotiation with the United States.
Other reactions?
So long as I have no questions, I'm still digesting all these very interesting ideas that were presented. But I'd like only to commend Professor Vasconcelos for his excellent presentation. And I think he produced fresh thinking on this very complex issue. Although I must confess that I feel more discouraged now at the end of this meeting than I was today. Nothing to this meeting. I don't know. I don't have any other comments to make at this moment.
Okay, with that nice words, I would like to introduce again the report. You are already copies, but the question is, will you be writing a revised version of the report after, as I understand it, you also presented it in India and other places after these different exchanges with scholars from different parts of the world. You will be revising it, and where you stand at the end of the day, if you could complete, please appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that interesting and very helpful conversation. I always learn when I came to play with course about CD and what can be done. What I'm going to do is to write an article, not really to revise the report, but write an article when I will take in consideration many of these discussions that I had. I had also presentations in Morocco and in Geneva. And I'm thinking to go to New York, also to make a presentation in New York. And what I take of the discussion is that what is lacking in my report, and is not so clear for me today, is the ISIS factor. Because when I looked at the report, the ISIS factor was not so important. So how to introduce this war against ISIS in the process of thinking keeping a peace enforcing mission is a complication. And there are two, and from the discussions I had here and elsewhere, there are two possible conclusions. One is ISIS factor makes easier an international coalition, because the ISIS factor brings more convergence between Iran and Saudi Arabia, between the United States and Russia, as if there was common enemy. I see that now in France, all the concerns with ISIS are very high. Possibly it's also certainly the case in Great Britain. So there is a convergence in relation to the ISIS factor, and this is perceived as a positive. I think that's where the Mistura is playing. When the Mistura proposes a freeze or ceasefire, local ceasefire, or a freeze around Aleppo, it's saying, as I heard from people close to the United Nations, even to the European Union, that now the ideal is to freeze the fight between the opposition and the government in order to fight ISIS. And so you need to have the government accepting not to attack the opposition, because the opposition is fighting ISIS, and the opposition not fighting the government, because they are fighting together ISIS. And that's where the history is trying to build. And the first person I heard to explain this idea was Jean-Marie Guénaud, when I was preparing the report. And Jean-Marie Guénaud was UN, has been the DPO chief in the past. And he was, now he's with the International Rights Group. And he said, and I heard the same thing by Michel Ducrot, French ambassador, that was ambassador to Syria. I don't know if you met him. And he has the same idea. Now it's possible to freeze, to arrive to an agreement between the opposition, normally ISIS opposition, and the government against ISIS. So this seems to be what Missouri is doing, and this is, we'll say, is a potential for accomplishment. And for me, this is a complication factor, not just a positive factor. Because there will be no solution for the ISIS question, and I put this in my report, without a political solution for Syria. Because it's in a political solution environment where there will be an agreement among the parts and the process will move from war to politics, that ISIS will be isolated. I don't see how ISIS will survive if there will be a deal, a peaceful political deal with some democratic component on it. They are good at war. They will be eyes at war, but they will not be able to survive if the process moves politically. They will be spoilers of the process, but we will have enormous coalition against them. We know also that ISIS is mobilizing people all over the world, not, and that is another taken that I have different from a general consensus. I don't think they are mobilizing these young people, at the beginning at least, because they were fighting the United States and the West, but because they were fighting Assad. Because these young people were seeing through internet, I'm speaking of the young Europeans, certainly the young Turks, the young, anywhere in the world, seeing people being killed by chemical weapons by Assad regime, the children killed, the people killed every day, and nobody doing anything. That, you know, I am a children of the 60s. You know, I am a young man in the 60s, mobilized by all the good causes of the world, and not necessarily finding the best ideologies for my aspirations for a better world. So I understand what is the factor that I'm mobilizing these people. It's first what they see in the television, and particularly in the internet, of what is going in Syria. And if you are not able to stop the policy of the humanitarian crisis of Syria, there will be no solution for ISIS. Remember what this means for a young European Muslim born in a society of human rights and values, to see 220,000 people killed and no answer. Of course, after, unfortunately, they find the most brutal ideology that they embrace, and this, of course, is critical, is other. And instead of contributing for peace, they contribute to war. But that's what I am saying. Without the solution of the Syrian question, there will be no solution for ISIS. To seek that we remove ISIS from the air and we solve the ISIS question, I think is wishful thinking. It will not happen. It will still perhaps deepen the problem. And we need a solution for Syria. We need a peace solution for Syria. And after peace solution, ISIS will be isolated. It will be isolated in Syria, and it will be isolated internationally. And it will be much more difficult for them to mobilize the young fighters, to mobilize the young people, and to find support, international support, as they are finding it. If not, they will not exist. ISIS will not exist with this external support of young people and of others. But anyway, this is, I will not try to develop more the ISIS factor, to bring more the ISIS factor in this conversation, in this analysis, that is of course very complicated. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very good. I hope to see you at our next event.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Very